Hello and welcome to Fox 29's News Now. Here's a live look over the Benjamin Franklin Parkway here in Philadelphia on this windy Monday morning, or afternoon I should say. Today is October the 29th. I'm first going to take you over to Attorney General Sessions. He's supposed to be delivering remarks to the Boston Lawyers chapter of the Federalist Society at the Omni Parker House in Boston, Massachusetts. It's about to be underway here, so we'll have that live for you, and there's more to come, so stay with us. And if you're just joining us, I just want to apologize for the picture. This is a live shot coming out of Boston, where Attorney General Jeff Sessions will be giving remarks to the Boston Lawyers Chapter of the Federalist Society. He's going to be speaking about the future of religious liberty. It's set to start any moment now, so again, just bear with us as we wait for him to come in.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody here today. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dan Hartman. I'm a member of the steering committee of the Boston Lawyers Chapter of the Federalist Society. I'd like to bring your attention, as you leave today, there are reading materials. Please sign up, join our emailing list so you can hear about future events like this. The Boston Lawyers Chapter is beyond honored today to be hosting this event on the future of religious liberty with three distinguished guests. Jordan Lawrence from the Alliance Defending Freedom, U.S. Attorney Andrew Lelling, and of course, the Attorney General of the United States, the Honorable Jeff Sessions. We're especially honored that Attorney General Sessions is joining us today in Boston to help us celebrate another World Series championship. I know that as an Alabama football fan, he knows a thing or two about celebrating national championships. Roll Tide. But on a more nor are we. But on a more serious note, especially given the heartbreaking and the tragic events that took place this weekend in Pittsburgh, there is no more important time to speak about the right of Americans to practice their religion freely. To begin that discussion, I'd like to introduce Jordan Lawrence, whose organization, the Alliance Defending Freedom, is responsible for numerous victories at the Supreme Court protecting religious liberty. Jordan Lawrence serves as Senior Counsel and Director of the Strategic Engagement with the Alliance Defending Freedom, where he plays a key role with the Alliance Advancement Team. Lawrence has argued before the U.S. Supreme Court in the precedent-setting Southworth v. Board of Regents of the University of Wisconsin system in 1999, challenging the university's requirement that forced unwilling students to contribute to campus activist groups. He led the challenge to New York City's ban on private worship services after hours in vacant public school buildings in the long-running Bronx Household of Faith Board of Education of the City of New York case. Lawrence also defended the right of conscience in the Elaine Photography v. Willock at the New Mexico Supreme Court. Lawrence earned a JD from the University of Minnesota Law School and received a BA in journalism from Stanford. Please welcome Jordan Lawrence.
I, too, want to echo that the horrific act of terrorism at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh 2 days ago emphasizes the importance of today's discussion on the future of religious liberty. We need more people who can publicly urge others to live by the words found in both the Jewish and Christian scriptures, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Our discussion on the future of religious liberty, I think, would be helped by describing three different types of religious liberty cases, and I'm going to illustrate them by using cases that the Alliance Defending Freedom has recently won at the U.S. Supreme Court. First, there are freedom of speech cases. This is when the government either censors or somehow regulates and limits private religious speech. An example of this is a case that we recently won at the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court struck down unanimously an ordinance by the town of Gilbert, Arizona, that regulated temporary signs stuck in the ground, depending on what you talked about. If it was political speech, the signs could be bigger than the reach of my arms and could be in the ground for 2 months. If it was a sign temporarily advertising where a religious service was meeting, it had to be much smaller and could only be put up 12 hours before the meeting began. The Supreme Court rightly said that this was an unconstitutional religious-based restriction. Another type of religious liberty issue is of equal access, where the government treats religious groups on the same terms and conditions that it does all other groups. Usually this problem comes because of an erroneous notion that in order for the government to be neutral towards religion, it must treat religion worse than everybody else. And I hope that the Orwellian nature of that is evident, that neutrality is not shown by treating religious groups as second-class citizens. In ADF's win in the Trinity Lutheran case at the Supreme Court, they ruled 7-2 to strike down a Missouri law that excluded only churches from applying for a grant to build playground services made from recycled tires. So religious liberty can be speech cases, they can be equal access cases, they also can be right of conscience exemption cases. Now these are situations where the government imposes a restriction that some adherents to a religious group cannot in good conscience agree to. These examples have existed through history. For example, the Jehovah's Witnesses in World War II, declining to pledge allegiance to, the Pledge of Allegiance in public schools, and then were expelled. The Supreme Court protected their right of conscience. Also, during the Vietnam War, when religious pacifists would object to participating in the military draft, federal law exempted them. Now, this leads me to make two observations about the future of religious liberty. I think we're going to see more and more of these right of conscience cases coming because government continues to expand and creates conflicts where none existed before. For example, when Congress recently expanded federal oversight of health care, the Obamacare regulations required businesses to pay for worker benefits that included what many deemed to be to pay for abortifacient contraceptives. Business owners, like the owners of Hobby Lobby and Conestoga Wood Specialties, there were two cases together, and ADF represented Conestoga Wood Specialties, they're cabinet builders from Pennsylvania, Up until that time, they had had no conflict at all with federal regulation. And they suddenly found themselves facing a dilemma of either obeying this new federal law that would involve them in ending unborn life, in their opinion, or to obey their religious beliefs and be punished by the government. Thankfully, the Supreme Court protected the conscientious rights of the owners in those two cases. The second observation I want to make about religious liberty involves compelled speech. So you can have government censoring speech, but in my opinion, what is even worse is when the government compels speech, when it provokes and orders dissenters to speak the message of the prevailing orthodoxy, whether it's the message of private individuals or the messages of government officials. Last term, the Supreme Court heard 3 cases involving compelled speech. 2 of those were ADF cases that we both won, Masterpiece Cake Shop and NIFLA. The third was the Janus case involving mandatory union dues. And there's going to be more of these compelled speech cases coming up. And what I would think the court should do to resolve these is look to the case that came from Boston in 1995, where the Supreme Court in the Hurley case protected the veterans group that organizes the Boston St. Patrick's Day Parade case from government coercion to include the messages the organizers did not support. And this is what the Supreme Court said in that unanimous decision. While the law is free to promote all sorts of conduct in place of harmful behavior, it is not free to interfere with speech for no better reason than promoting an approved message or discouraging a disfavored one, however enlightened either purpose may strike the government. Thank you. And I now want to introduce the U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts who will address us, Andrew or Andy Lelling. Before his appointment as U.S. Attorney for the District of Massachusetts, Mr. Lelling was a federal prosecutor for over 15 years, serving first in the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department and later in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia and the District of Massachusetts. And he has quite an amazing record. He was a lead prosecutor in a number of complex fraud, immigration, and international drug trafficking investigations, including most recently the successful prosecution of the largest pyramid schemes ever charged by the Department of Justice, which involved over 1 million victims worldwide and a loss of $3 billion. Before serving as federal prosecutor here, Mr. Lelling was counsel to the Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division, focusing on criminal civil rights enforcement, voting rights enforcement actions, and civil investigations of major city police departments. He is a graduate of Penn Law School in Philadelphia and received his bachelor's degree from Binghamton University. He is also excited about the Redskins, I'm from D.C., Red Sox winning the World Series last night, and he promises that the U.S. Attorney's Office will be vigilant to guard against any reinstatement of the curse of the Bambino. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan, for that introduction. I was trying to think of a good joke tying in the Red Sox with religious liberty, but it's tough to do that. Thank you to the Federal Society for hosting this event today. It's a privilege to be here with the Attorney General. His presence marks the importance of this issue on an ongoing basis for the country, and I know it's important to the Attorney General personally. They often call religious liberty the first freedom because it's the first sentence. In fact, it's the first clause of the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. It precedes even the right to free speech, and it should do that. Right? The right to free speech is merely the right to say what you want to say, but the right to religious liberty is the right to have the values you want to have. As one of the founders put it, a person's allegiance to his or her faith, both in timing and in degree of obligation, comes long before his or her allegiance to the state, to the government under which they live. A free society doesn't force people to choose between one or the other, between their religious values and complying with the law. But over the last few years, there are many who have used the law to do exactly that. And that's what the Attorney General meant when this last July he said that, quote, "A dangerous movement, undetected by many, is now challenging and eroding our great tradition of religious freedom." In 2012, a baker in Colorado politely refuses to create a wedding cake for a same-sex couple, citing his religious beliefs, his Christian beliefs. He offers to sell them pre-made goods from his store, but he won't lend his artistic expertise to the creation of a cake for a wedding that goes against his deeply held religious views. So the couple sued him. And at a hearing before the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, commissioners called this baker despicable and compared his beliefs to those that prompted the Holocaust. No one present, no other commissioner on the board, disavowed those remarks, and neither did any judge sitting on the two appellate courts that reviewed the matter after the finding of the commission against the baker. This past June, the Supreme Court ultimately did the right thing in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, citing the overt hostility of the Colorado Commission to the baker's free exercise of his faith. But what shocked me, and what should give us pause if we're thinking about the future of religious liberty in the United States, was that there was any dissent. Justices Ginsburg and Sotomayor dismissed the bigoted comments of the Colorado commissioners as offhand remarks by one or two members of a larger body, and the justices said nothing about the silence of the other commissioners or the silence of the subsequent courts in the face of this outburst of bigotry by these commission members in a public hearing. One wonders what these justices would have said if the commissioners' discriminatory remarks had not been based on the free exercise of religious liberty, but on race or gender. And yet the Constitution, as far as I know, does not protect any one of these categories less than it protects the others. Similarly, witness the staunch, years-long resistance to allowing religious Americans to avoid having to facilitate payment for someone else's contraception. Last year, at the President's direction, government agencies began implementing an individual moral exemption from the contraception mandate of the Affordable Care Act. I think the laser printer paper had not yet cooled before the state of Massachusetts sued to block the exemption from being implemented in Massachusetts. My office, working with lawyers at the Justice Department in D.C., recently won this case in the trial court, preserving the moral exemption for Massachusetts residents, and it's now on appeal. Think about this trend. These conscientious objectors, the baker who doesn't want to make the cake, or the religious institutions or small business owners who don't want to facilitate paying for contraception, they aren't saying that others shouldn't have access to wedding cakes for gay weddings or to contraception. They just don't want to be coerced, and the word is coerced, into participating themselves. But refusal to participate implies a rejection of an underlying liberal dogma, and that is unacceptable, because a dogma it is. The key to understanding what's at stake in these religious liberty debates and how truly scary they are is to remember that liberal secularism is not the absence of a set of beliefs versus a particular religion. It's a competing set of beliefs, one that wants to win, to prevail at the expense of religious faith. I think of all the ink spilled in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, it's Justice Gorsuch who got this point correctly. On the first page of his concurrence, he notes, "The state of Colorado chose to support the secular beliefs of other bakers, but not the religious beliefs of this baker at the center of that case." And much of America thinks that that is perfectly fine to do. In my office, when I'm asked what makes a good prosecutor, I say they need to be the best lawyer in the courtroom and that they need to proceed without fear. One of the reasons I have such respect for our Attorney General is that he has those traits. He is fearless in advocating and pursuing the rule of law for all Americans regardless of political stripe and including those of all religious faiths. In October 2017, following direction from the President, the Attorney General issued a lengthy memorandum specifying where and how agencies and departments should be protecting the prerogatives of religious faith. In July 2018, the Attorney General set up a religious liberty task force within the Department of Justice to help implement that guidance, in part by tasking attorney generals like me with implementing the guidance and making sure that it is reflected in our enforcement efforts and in the cases that we bring. In my time as the U.S. Attorney here in Boston, I've been thankful for the Attorney General's leadership in helping us to ensure and promote the rule of law, which is the surest safeguard for all Americans. As I said, it's a privilege to have him here with us today so that he can share with us his thoughts on this important subject. Please join me in welcoming the Attorney General of the United States.
Thanks, Andy. Good. Thank you all. It is great. Please, thank you. It is super to be with you. Andy, thank you for the super leadership you're providing to the United States Attorney's Office. It is one of our most important offices in the country, no doubt about it, here in Boston, and you're involved in so many important cases of national and international significance, and it was great to get briefed today on some of your gang work and anti-fentanyl work. The fentanyl in this region is one reason why
I was hungry, and you did not feed me. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. I was naked, and you did not clothe me. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me.
Well, thank you for your comments.
And in prison, and you did not visit me. Brother Jeff, as a fellow United Methodist, I call upon you to repent, to care for those in need, to remember that when you do not care for others, you are wounding the body of Christ.
Well, thank you for those remarks and attack, but I would just tell you we do our best every day to fulfill my responsibility to enforce the laws of the United States.
Exercising his free exercise of religion. That is the person who represents the Christian tradition, the faith that everyone here professes to believe in, who is actually sharing with us the words of Jesus himself. The words of Jesus are actually represented in the book of Isaiah, chapter 10, verse 11.
All right, we thank you for sharing your thoughts.
I thought we were here to protect religious liberty. I am a pastor of a Baptist church, and you are escorting me out for exercising my religious freedom. That doesn't make any sense. That's very hypocritical for this group of people to be wanting to protect religious freedom while you are escorting me out for doing that very work. And as a black man...
Well, we would say this. Thank you all and for your comments, and we're glad to hear them, but that's pretty close to what we refer to as the heckler's veto. The ability of one individual to prevent others in a proper forum to be able to express a hopefully coherent thought about a serious subject. I don't think there's anything in the Scripture, and I don't believe there's anything in my theology that says a secular nation state cannot have lawful laws to control immigration in its country. That's what we're talking about. Not immoral, not indecent, and not unkind to state what your laws are and then set about to enforce them, in my view. And I feel like that's my responsibility, and that's what I intend to do. It's great to be back in Boston, my third trip, the cradle of liberty. As some say, the hub of the universe, right here in Boston. Thank you for being here. I know many of you look a little hungover from the ball games. I made it to the 12th inning the other night, but that's as far as I could handle it, and it was an exciting game for sure. So I want to thank particularly the Boston Lawyers Chapter of the Federalist Society for inviting me here to be with you, especially Michael Sullivan, former United States Attorney and former Acting Director of ATF, Jordan Lawrence of ADF. Thank you, Jordan, and the work that your group does. So I've admired and appreciated the Federalist Society's mission from its beginning in 1982. I couldn't say I was present at its creation, but I was watching the United States Attorney appointed by Ronald Reagan in Alabama. I cheered the courage they showed in challenging the activist liberal orthodoxy in the judicial branch, and with not much expectation of change, frankly. We'd all sort of gotten beaten down in the 70s and 80s, it seemed. But I was wrong. I cannot name any other group over the last 35 years, and I've given thought to it, maybe 50 years, that's come close to the policy achievements of the Federalist Society in the areas that they're engaged in. It's been a tremendous, unbelievably successful activity. The jurisprudence of the neutral umpire, as Justice Roberts testified in our committee, is on the ascendancy, and activism and ideology in adjudications is on the defensive intellectually. It's a stunning reversal. And so thanks to the President Trump, there are two more Federalist Society members of the United States Supreme Court. I got to tell you. Here. And flying up, we were discussing it. There are a number in the White House, and I got to tell you, right here with me, we have a number. Jesse Panuccio, where's Jesse? There he is. Jesse's our acting Associate Attorney General, number 3 in the department. Harvard Law, Federalist Society. Sarah Flores, I don't know where Sarah, there's Sarah right here. Sarah was president of the Harvard Law Federalist Society when she was at Harvard. Rod Rosenstein, our Deputy Attorney General, was a Federalist Society member at Harvard during his time here. Gary Barnett, he's a Boston University guy. I was at Boston College. Which one did Doug Flutie play at? Oh, the other one? I thought you were at that good place they beat Alabama. I still remember Doug Flutie with the Hail Mary. Is that insensitive? Can I say Hail Mary in this group? Violating some establishment of religion, I guess. But it's an honor to be with you all on this historic Parker House. It's hosted figures like Thoreau, Emerson, Hawthorne, Longfellow, Oliver Wendell Holmes, John Kennedy. And it's where the Boston cream pie was established or invented. But perhaps more relevant to our discussion, it's where John Adams, it's always important to me, I mention it often, it's very significant, defended British soldiers in a jury trial before the American Revolution. Well, that ought to tell us something about how law develops. By chance, I was reading an old textbook, a college textbook on literature, and it was Burke's speech to the Parliament advocating reconciliation with the colonies and not war. And he said, at any rate, I understand. First, he said they were just following the law we taught them, and then he said, I understand they sell more copies of Blackstone's commentaries in the colonies than the mother country. This is how law develops over centuries. And we're heirs to that we are heirs to such a system that's protected our safety, prosperity, and liberty for so long should fill us with awe and energize our determination to preserve, protect, and enhance it. Every generation is honor-bound to defend our magnificent rule of law. And the Federalist Society is at the forefront of it, and I salute you for it. On the 150th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the President of the United States, a former Massachusetts governor named Calvin Coolidge, you think he could get elected today? I don't know, in Massachusetts. Silent Cal was so magnificent, I got to say. He asserted, quote, "The American Revolution represented the informed and mature convictions of a great mass of independent, liberty-loving, God-fearing people who knew their rights and possessed the courage and dare to maintain them, knew the rights that existed, and they fought to maintain them. Coolidge argued that the revolution began in pulpits. In particular, he cited preachers Thomas Hooker of Connecticut, John Wise of Massachusetts. Generations, even a century before the Revolution, they preached that all men are created equal. They are equal before the state because they are equals before God. And if men are equal, then no man has the right to rule another without his consent. So that's why one Boston lawyer named John Adams wrote in his old age, "The war was no part of the revolution. It was only an effect and consequence of it. The revolution was in the minds of the people, and this was effected before a drop of blood was drawn at Lexington." That's good insight for us to remember today. The American ideals of self-government, equality, liberty were in the air. And they were in the air in large part because of theological traditions that were planted, took root, and blossomed in colonial America. Given the colonial experience in fleeing religious persecution, so many had done so, the centrality of religion in promoting the ideas embodied in the Constitution, and the belief that public virtue was critical to the American experiment, it's no wonder the founders took care to enact robust and strong protections for religious liberty. And so it's fitting that we gather here today to talk about religious freedom in this country, and it could not come at a more important time. We're still reeling today from the murderous rampage in Pittsburgh that took the life of 11 congregants, targeted because of their faith, worshiping faithfully in their own synagogue. This was not just an attack on the Jewish faith. It was an attack on all people of faith. It was an attack on America's values of protecting those of faith. It cannot and will not be tolerated. It's a direct threat to what we are. You can be sure that our team, the FBI and the Department of Justice, on this case right now. Charges have already been filed, and we intend to do our duty in this matter with vigor and integrity. So today, I'd like to talk about the current conditions of religious expression in America and what we at DOJ are doing about it, how we're going to approach things. So we have protesters in this room, but we had a lot of people who were dissenters from mainstream thought in Europe before the American Revolution. They came here to seek freedom, particularly and most often freedom of religion. And I think the people at the time of the founding understood the Enlightenment. They understood what was happening. They went from toleration of different views to a view that toleration means there's a preeminent religious view and everybody else is to be tolerated. They created an equal view of religion. And Madison laid it out, I thought, incredibly well, having read not too long ago his remonstrances about the principles of religious freedom. He says that the duty one owes to his or her creator transcends the state, that civil authority has no control over that relationship. It pre-exists that relationship, and the state cannot even take cognizance of that relationship. It has no ability to interfere in that fundamental human religious relationship. It precedes the even existence of the states. So that's the way it was, I think, at the time. It was placed in our Constitution in pretty much that same way. That view held. It holds today. The Constitution contains several protections for religion. Article 6 guarantees, quote, that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States, close quote. The First Amendment guarantees the free exercise of religion, bans laws respecting an establishment of religion, and secures the freedom of speech so that citizens can always speak their faith, say what they think. So you can have pornographic speech, you can have speech that verges on fraud, but you certainly should be able to have and exercise religious faith, religious speech. So some people argue not only that governments must not endorse particular religious views, but that religion must be banished from the public square entirely. Challenges to the free exercise of religious faith have become frequent and acute. In recent years, we've seen nuns ordered to pay for contraceptives. We've seen a United States senator interrogate a judicial nominee about her religious dogma, even though, as noted, the Constitution explicitly forbids a religious test for office. We've witnessed the ordeal, still ongoing, faced by the Colorado baker who simply doesn't want the government to force him to create art that offends his religious beliefs. Why don't they just leave him alone? I mean, for goodness sakes, what is it that makes us think that we have to reach into a person's belief on a matter of this kind and place that individual in a confrontation with his government and his conscience when it's not necessary? There may be sometimes it's necessary. Well, this one certainly isn't one of them in my view. We've seen a state tell a religious organization it cannot receive the same funding for playgrounds that everyone else receives simply because it's a religious organization. We've seen a federal district court strike down a 65-year-old tax exemption for clergy housing because it reasoned that not forcing religion to pay the government somehow means the government is establishing a religion. Jesse Panuccio argued that case last week. Go okay? Went well. That's how I like it. So we've seen groups that defend religious freedom, including a certain organization that is undefeated at the Supreme Court. Jordan? Undefeated virtually, I think, at the Supreme Court. Certainly, I know I heard you won 8 in a row in matters that you've taken a position on. Labeled a hate group. I mean, this is unbelievable to me that what's happening. These are deeply troubling incidents that should concern everyone, religious or otherwise, who cares about our Constitution. Those pushing this worldview overlook the fundamental fact that the framers understood. A constitutional republic can only survive if its citizens are committed to a shared set of principles. Most importantly, the principle that all people are created equal, and religion is a key foundation for those virtues. While no government should ever require anyone to abide by a particular creed, a free government must vigilantly of its citizens to exercise and educate others, as they may attempt to, in their faith. So Madison's and Jefferson's ideas were clear. They carried the day. The relationship of an American with his or her God transcends civil authority, and the government cannot take cognizance of it. That's why the Department of Justice is taking action to defend religious liberty. Shortly after he took office, President Trump directed me to issue a legal guidance to ensure that all federal executive agencies would faithfully apply the laws that protect religious liberty. Make sure the government doesn't disrupt and demean religious liberty. So our team embraced the challenge. They went at it all the way, and I was able to issue that guidance 1 year ago Friday. It lays out 20 fundamental principles that the Constitution and federal statutes require of the executive branch. Those include the principle that free exercise means a right to reasonably act. not just meditate in secret. Faith constantly demands action. The guidance tells the executive branch how to follow the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA. A few years ago, that would not have been controversial, but now it seems to be. RFRA was originally supported and passed by the ACLU support. Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden, John Kerry, Harry Reid, Chris Dodd, Ted Kennedy. All not exactly, I doubt any of them are Federalist members, but it passed 97-3 in the United States Senate and was signed by President Clinton into law. It doesn't get much more bipartisan than that. And as we approach the 25th anniversary of RFRA next month, and I hope to have Senator Hatch over to celebrate that at the department. He worked so hard on it. Many of its original supporters, including the ACLU, have denounced this law. They argue that federal government should not protect a citizen's right to freely exercise his or her religion if that exercise offends or inconveniences others. And that simply provides an objector's veto. That's not freedom. It's not freedom. Clearly, Americans are free to exercise their religious convictions openly, in speech and in action, within reasonable limits, of course. So we're concerned about this. I think most Americans are. Under President Trump, the Department of Justice is going to court across America to defend the rights of people of faith, including defending RFRA. And we are aggressively and appropriately enforcing our civil rights laws, our hate crimes laws, and laws protecting churches and faith groups. And we're seeing problems there. So let me give you a report on what's happening. Since January of 2017, when I became Attorney General, we've obtained 14 indictments and 10 convictions in cases involving arson or other threats against houses of worship and against individuals because of their religion. Over the past 12 months, the Department has obtained 30 hate crime convictions, and since 2017 has indicted 50 more such defendants, and this weekend we added one more to the list. We charged Robert Bowers with 29 federal counts for the heinous murders at the Tree of Life congregation. He'll be subjected to the death penalty, perhaps. This afternoon, Ryder Rosenstein, our deputy, is hosting a hate crimes roundtable to improve enforcement. People are entitled to be and must be protected in their houses of worship. We've also used civil litigation and statements of interest to protect the rights of the American people. In January, we filed a brief in a Montana court to defend parents who claim that the state barred their children from a private school scholarship fund because they attended a religious school that was private. Other private schools can get money from the state, just not a religious private school. We got involved in a lawsuit filed by the Alliance Defending Freedom against Georgia Gwinnett College, a taxpayer-funded school that punished a student for sharing his faith outside a designated free speech zone they have at Georgia's Gwinnett College. In this case, the free speech zone was just 10,000% of the campus. And even inside that free speech zone, you needed permission from the school to speak. Give me a break. This isn't where we need to be. We filed an amicus brief on behalf of the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., which was refused advertising space for having a religious message in the subway, on the buses in Washington, D.C. Innocuous message. I think it had a shepherd and a couple of sheep on it before Christmas. And we argued in support of the Colorado baker, Jack Phillips. So over the past year, we've taken new steps to be even more effective in defending people's rights. In June, I announced the Place to Worship initiative. Under this initiative, the Department of Justice is holding public events across America and improving training for federal prosecutors, like Andy's team, about legal protections for houses of worship. When I was in the Senate, we passed a law called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, or RLUIPA, we call it, under which the Department of Justice can file a civil action in court when religious groups are discriminated against in zoning laws. It's a bigger problem than you might think, than I thought. During my tenure as Attorney General, we filed 5 amicus briefs in RLUIPA cases, including one regarding a Catholic church, one regarding a Hindu temple, and we've sued on behalf of an Orthodox Jewish congregation in New Jersey and settled 4 cases involving mosques. The head of the Civil Rights Division at the department is going to court on Wednesday to defend an evangelical church in Maryland. So that's pretty unusual. There's sometimes it's hostility to the religious doctrines or faith group. Sometimes they think they lose tax revenue. They'd rather have, a Walmart and collect a lot of tax revenue, and zonings have been blocked. In July, I announced the creation of our Religious Liberty Task Force to ensure our legal guidance document is being properly enforced, the one we issued. And today I'm announcing our next step. As many of you know, last year the Supreme Court decided a case called Trinity Lutheran, in which it held that a state policy denying grant money to any applicant owned or controlled by a religious entity violated the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment. The court declared that a state may not expressly discriminate against otherwise eligible religious entities by disqualifying them from a public benefit solely because of their religious character. So this is a significant ruling, no doubt. And today I'm ordering the Religious Liberty Task Force to examine, in light of that Supreme Court ruling, whether there are other instances in which this kind of discrimination is occurring at the federal level, and if so, it must and it will stop. We're going to keep going to court. We're going to keep winning, like the Tide and the Red Sox. We intend to keep winning. I say that because we are winning and because our superb legal team carefully reviews each case we take to make sure it's legally sound. I would parenthetically say our fabulous Solicitor General Noel Francisco and team have identified 4 cases in which we felt our predecessors had taken the wrong position in court. And we took, not unprecedented, but we took the step to reverse positions on those 4 cases. And I'm pleased to say that in each one of those 4 cases, the Supreme Court's ruled on our side in them. So we try our best. Thank you. To advance proper and sound legal principles while defending American liberty. So let me say this. Religious freedom is not absolute. No one argues that. There's no right to do wrong. There's no right to deprive others of their rights. We got a guy when I was United States Attorney in Mobile, I forgot what his name was, but he claimed to be the bishop of the Church of the New Song, and he came from the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary to claim that his sacraments called for steak and wine every Friday night. And so the judge Pittman was nice to him, let him come and have his say, and he asked the judge to call him bishop. The judge wouldn't call him bishop. He asked him again to call him bishop. The judge wouldn't call him bishop. And he said, well, I won't call you judge either, Pittman. So he didn't win the case and went on. But So there are limits to what you can claim as part of religious liberty, no doubt about it. That's not what we're talking about. Of course we're not. Thomas Jefferson scoffed at saying that it neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg if someone has a wrong religion, one I don't agree with. Certain people seem to have forgotten that. That's why in the short term, some of these court cases are necessary. But also, I think we should begin to recover respect for one another. I well remember my father, and another time my mother, corrected me in the same way, saying, never make fun of somebody's religion. Well, that's good advice. He was entirely serious about it. He explained that religion was very important to people, and to criticize their faith was to attack them as a person, something very deep that you're attacking when you do that. But today, many people are getting a different message from our culture, it seems, and they are being told to wage a total cultural war. But not everything needs to be decided in court. We don't have to get offended by everything, although we tend to in this world. What we need is not more litigation, maybe, but more tolerance or simple patience with other people. And so no matter what your creed may be, we all would do well to recover that mutual respect and a certain humility about our own religious beliefs. As we work toward that good and lawful goal, a goal President Donald Trump gave to us at DOJ, we're going to continue to uphold the Founders' respect for religious liberty. And we will keep defending the rights of the American people. We will never fail to protect the American right to freely exercise their faith as they choose. We will steadfastly defend those rights with all our skill and determination. We will not acquiesce in the diminishment of this heritage that we have been given, and we ask for your support in this work. Thank you all. It's great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. We're now going to move to a brief discussion, conversation between the Attorney General and Jordan Lawrence to talk about some of the issues we heard today. Thanks.
Thank you for your speech, General Sessions. We also want to thank you for your leadership at the Department of Justice. You got a lot of things going on, and it's a gargantuan challenge that you're handling very well. In a speech last July, you noted a growing skepticism, even hostility to claims of religious freedom, which I have noted as well. And why do you think that is?
Well, I'm not sure. That there certainly seems to be a tide of pretty vigorous secularism in our society. And there seems to be a subtle but noticeable hostility to just plain religious faith. I hear it from pastors when you're out campaigning like I did when I was in the Senate. You heard it a lot. People felt fearful about their ability to stand in their pulpit and advocate for the beliefs that they held deeply. So you have that, and then I mentioned a number of the things in the speech.
Right.
Whether you have the nuns being demanded over the contraception issue, what they must do, or the cake baker, or other cases out there. I think it's a legitimate concern, and you probably have some yourself, Jordan, that if you've dealt with, but We've cited a number of cases, and we'll be continuing to advance the idea that religion deserves respect and is protected in the First Amendment.
And we applaud that, and that is excellent. The memorandum on federal law protections for religious liberty that you wrote, I think, is some important principles, and you talked about some of this. And I'm most curious about is that I just think it's always easy for the government to say whatever interest we're promoting is right, and basically not be very tolerant of or respectful of a right of conscience being asserted in a situation. And what steps have you been taking to make sure that there's more sensitivity to people asserting religious liberty claims in the face of some government requirement?
Well, the first thing that we need is that the federal government not suppress or violate free expression of religious faith. So that's one of the primary things that this task force does. We've got large numbers of cabinet agencies, sub-cabinet agencies, ABC agencies that think they're independent and uncontrolled by anybody. And they have legal counsel, and there are a lot of opinions out there that have led people to believe that certain things cannot be done legally when they can be done if you carefully understand the opinions of the Supreme Court and read the Constitution carefully. So we want to be sure, and one of our primary goals in this task force is to make sure the federal government is on the right side of this issue, that understands fully free expression and protects it.
And do you think that, and you mentioned this somewhat in your speech, but that not everyone in the United States is Christian? There's Hindus and Sikhs, Muslims, etc. And how is this how is this accommodation and this sensitivity being done across the board for all religious faiths?
Well, we protect all religious faiths, and that's exactly what the Constitution contemplates and has since our founding. And so we've gotten really strong support, I believe, from virtually every religious group for the guidance that we've given, because it protects different religions from state domination.
Well, and you were also talking about the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and I have found that sometimes people mistake it as an automatic get-out-of-jail-free card if somebody asserts a religious belief, and it doesn't operate that way, as you mentioned in your speech. I think if that were true, everyone would belong to the church that doesn't believe in paying taxes. But federal law protects, we don't have a military draft right now, but it's still in the books, protects religious objectors to the military. But how does this balance out when, so it is selective, is that sometimes the religious believer will win and sometimes they won't when faced with a contrary governmental interest, and how does that all balance out?
Well, that's tough sometimes to balance it out, as
Right.
you well know. Where do you draw the line? Justice Scalia wasn't happy with peyote, whatever.
Right.
You know, you can't have cocaine as part of your religious activities and expect the state to approve it. So there are lines on which you can't cross, but reasonable respect for people's beliefs is important. It's a clear and understandable view that Christians may conclude that killing another person, even in war, is unjustifiable. Right. So we've created mechanisms, for the most part, that allows people who have a sincere religious belief, not just a philosophical belief, but a religious belief, transcendent belief, that certain activities are wrong. Can't we accommodate that? Mm-hmm. Well, they figured that out, I think it's World War I, if not before, and people became medics, so they did other things other than actually seeking to kill a fellow human being. So we respect that, and I think that's sort of the approach we should take. We don't. Why can't we do that with a baker? Why can't we do that with the nuns?
Exactly.
Yes, we can do it. Well within our ability to do so, and we should respect them enough to make that accommodation.
Now, the objection that comes the opposite way from what you just said is that is giving some sort of improper preference to the religious believers. And what do you say to that?
Well, the first line of the First Amendment, as you noted, or Andy did, that it says you're allowed to freely exercise your religion. Doesn't mean that you have to keep everything you do secret. Action is a part of every faith system I'm aware of. You're exposed to do things and not do things. It's not too popular today to tell somebody they can't do something. They shouldn't do something. Something's wrong. But most faiths, I believe there is a right and a wrong. There is a truth, an objective truth that we can ascertain. And I would just say parenthetically, we got a Supreme Court justice who gave a speech half a dozen times that quoted another professor favorably, that there is no objectivity, just a series of perspectives. Well, this is a difficult thing for me to conceive how in our system that you don't seek the truth. And so we respect people that seek the truth. We don't always agree on what the truth is, but we respect this mechanism. And I think that protecting the rule of law means that we protect the right of people to pursue truth as if it's part of their religious faith as much as we can and accommodate them in doing so.
And I just think in a civil society, that is the way we show inherent respect to all individuals, that as much as possible we try to protect both what they believe, what they say about it, and how they exercise their faith.
Amen.
So with the growth of government, there are many federal programs that help the homeless, help victims of storms, etc., and that it creates a situation where religious groups who are motivated to help those in need are partnering with the federal government. And you talked about this a bit. So it's not only funding, but just participation. And does the memorandum and your other initiatives deal with this type of thing to help facilitate this kind of cooperation to help people in need?
You mean to partner more with religious institutions?
As opposed to excluding them because of some establishment clause concern or something like that?
Yes, we would like to see as much of that as possible. There could be some legitimate constitutional concerns if carried too far. But yes, we strongly would like to see that be carried out where appropriate.
Well, good. Well, thank you for coming here today, and we so appreciate you coming and speaking to us about the important issue of religious liberty, and that everyone has the right to assert what they say without undue government interference. Thank you very much, General.
Thank you.
Again, that was Attorney General Sessions delivering remarks to the Boston Lawyers Chapter of the Federalist Society at the Omni Parker House in Boston, Massachusetts. Well, Superstorm Sandy hit our state 6 years ago, but thousands of New Jerseyans still struggle. Earlier, Governor Murphy had a press conference at Union Beach, where 56 damaged homes still remain unfinished. Murphy announced the next steps that they will be taking to return families to their homes. Here's a look at that from earlier today.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to introduce Heather Chapter. My name is Doug Quinn, and I'm one of many Sandy survivors who are still struggling to get back home. I was cheated by my flood insurance company and the engineering firm they hired to do their dirty work. What should have been a simple process of filing for my insurance claim that I had paid premiums for and getting the money to rebuild my home turned into a never-ending nightmare that has consumed my life, all of our lives. I'm here today with my fellow New Jersey Organizing Project members who fought so hard for our communities. We fought FEMA, we fought the insurance companies, we fought the REM program, we fought crooked contractors, predatory banks trying to take our homes away through foreclosure. We've struggled for years to rebuild our homes while our savings evaporated and debt piled up. Even people who did the right thing and found enough money to rebuild their homes got clawback letters from the state demanding tens of thousands of dollars that they just don't have. We've been all alone. Everywhere we turned for help, there was nothing. And there's a couple people in this room who are some of the only people that have our back. Senator Booker, Congressman Pallone, and most of all, United States Senator Robert Menendez. Senator Menendez has been our one-man 911 fund. Every time there was a problem, we called him. Every single time, he's come through for us, for Sandy victims and the state of New Jersey. And so I want to thank you, sir, for being a light in the darkness for us. Every year on the Sandy anniversary, we watched former Governor Christie get up and do a victory lap and brag about what a great job he was doing getting people home. We had no idea who he was talking about because it certainly wasn't us. This year, it's a new Sandy anniversary. We have a new governor. There's a new start, a new collaborative attitude to bring humanity and compassion back into the recovery process. We're going to work together and get everybody home. Our goal is to get all of our citizens home and put Sandy behind us so we can start working to build a better New Jersey for our families to thrive in. And now, sir, that I've set the bar really high for you, I want to introduce the leader of the great state of New Jersey, Governor Phil Murphy. All right.
I feel like just saying, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Bob Menendez. There is a rumor that somewhere in heaven, my late father and late big brother are still out on an all-night bender as charter members of the Red Sox Nation. Easy. Doug, thank you. Before I jump into the topic at hand, I want to just quickly note that today is the day in which New Jersey's paid sick leave law takes effect. Starting today, the roughly 1.2 million New Jerseyans who were not offered a paid sick day by their employers, by the way, nearly 40% of our private sector workforce, will no longer have to choose between going in when they're too sick to work or not getting the day's pay. By providing this right that so many of us take for granted, I'm certain that we will see both greater worker morale and productivity and a healthier workforce and families. This remains the right thing for our working families and for our economy. For this law to take effect at the beginning of the flu season wasn't part of our initial plan, but the timing couldn't be better. Allowing workers to take a sick day is also a matter of protecting public health. Simply ask any restaurant worker or child care worker. New Jersey is once again proudly leading, and we are leading by example to make our state stronger and fairer for all of our families. It is a distinct honor to be here, to be back in Union Beach. I want to give a shout out in absentia to Mayor Paul Smith. Thank the council for welcoming us so graciously. I'm honored, as always, to be with Senators Menendez and Booker, Congressman Frank Pallone, Sheila Oliver, not only the Lieutenant Governor, but the DCA Commissioner, and that's the important point here, wanted to be here today, but she's attending a funeral, so keep her in your prayers. Doug, thank you, man, not just for setting the bar high, but for being with us this morning, for sharing your story, and for your advocacy on behalf of your fellow Sandy survivors, and to everybody who's a part of the New Jersey Organizing Project. I know for you and Tom's River and for families here in Union Beach and up and down the shore, it has sometimes felt as if over the past 6 years you were shouting into a well. And today, your voice is being heard at long last. Over the past 6 years, we have watched our shore communities rise back up from the destruction left by Superstorm Sandy. Homes were raised or rebuilt to stronger standards. Streets and infrastructure were repaired. Schools and businesses reopened. The shore's boardwalk economies rolled back to life. Much of that was because of the tireless work of our congressional delegation to make sure our federal government rolled up its sleeves to help us rebuild. Again, I particularly thank Senator Menendez, Senator Booker, and Congressman Pallone, the dean, I might add, of the shore delegation, and who represents Union Beach. Because of their work, Congress passed the initial $60 billion Sandy relief bill. And again, on this one, I don't know where we would be without Senator Bob Menendez. Everyone has to understand the centrality of the role that he played. He championed, along with Senator Booker and Congressman Pallone, a law that stopped flood insurance costs from skyrocketing, saving New Jersey homeowners approximately $50 million in premiums. Additionally, Senator Menendez pushed FEMA on its underpayments to impacted families and delivered an additional $260 million in flood insurance funds to the families who are entitled to them. Senators Menendez and Booker and Congressman Pallone have delivered millions of dollars in needed federal Sandy relief funds to our communities. I thank them again for their hard work and dedication to protecting our families. Guys, well done. Today, this community, like every Sandy-impacted community, exemplifies the spirit of New Jersey and the spirit of neighbors working together toward renewal. But certainly, Union Beach still retains the scars that remind us of the worst of Sandy. For example, while there are 330 finished homes here, 56 in Union Beach alone remain unfinished. That's 56 families still waiting to write the end of their Sandy story. That's 56 too many, and they are why we are here today. We can congratulate ourselves all we want on the rebuilding, and we certainly thank the many organizations, state and local officials, construction workers, and others who played a role. However, we cannot stop until every family in every impacted community is once again able to walk back through the doors of their homes. I mentioned 56 in Union Beach. The number statewide is about 1,200 families. 1,200 families, 6 years later, who remain out of their homes. We must get them back in. And that mission is what brings us together today. Today, we're taking 2 steps to clear this final hurdle. Number 1, we are announcing the creation, through the Department of Community Affairs, of a new zero-interest, uncapped, forgivable loan fund through which qualified homeowners who have already maxed out their $150,000 grant awards can seek the additional funds needed to finish the work on their homes. Yeah. The $50 million in funding will come from a rededication of as yet undistributed federal Sandy HUD funds. In other words, we could do this at no cost to the state or to taxpayers and without impacting any existing recovery projects. Second, we're going to take a new approach to working with families being asked to repay over disbursements, which is a diplomatic phrase for clawbacks they had received through the Reconstruction, Rehabilitation, Elevation, and Mitigation, or, as we all know it, the REM program. We are announcing a freeze on new recoupment requests effective immediately. You might ask why I'm waiting until this date to announce this, because in fact, since our administration took office in January, DCA has not made any formal requests for any recoupments. We've actually technically frozen them since January 16th, but we're memorializing that and formalizing it today. Now, during this formal freeze, DCA, in addition to this, will revise its policies to make it clear to families who are simply following the guidance they have been given in Sandy's wake that we are going to work with them and take their family's actual and current financial situation into account. We will work with them to assess their needs and create a plan that works for them. Some families facing hardship may even see some of or all of their debt wiped clean. In every case, however, New Jersey will no longer employ collection agency tactics. And DCA will formalize the details of this new policy in a process that listens to the voices of Sandy survivors. For too long, these decisions have been made behind closed doors. That era is over. We must make it clear to the families still rebuilding from Sandy that they aren't going to be forgotten. It is all too easy to think that we're back entirely from the havoc Sandy wreaked on our shore communities, and many others, I might add, across our state. But the survivors still trying to get back into their homes tell a different story. They've been waiting a long time, 6 years. Where they have run up against the faithless bureaucracy, they will now be met with real people ready to help. We will show them compassion as we show our resolve to complete the recovery process. And with Senator Menendez, Senator Booker, Congressman Pallone, and our entire delegation, we will continue to fight for them in Washington. It is way past time, 6 years to be exact, that we did so. It is now my honor to introduce the senior senator from the great state of New Jersey, Senator Bob Menendez.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Governor. And Governor, in our lives in public service, sometimes we wonder if what we do really makes a difference in people's lives. What you just announced is going to make a real difference in people's lives and finally get people back in their home. Thank you, Governor, for what you're doing. I appreciate it a great deal. As we join here, I also want to recognize the firefighters. This is an all-volunteer fire department, and they faced extraordinary challenges on Sandy and since, and we are using their house right now, so I want to recognize them and thank them for their incredible service. 6 years have passed since that fateful day that changed so many lives. We all remember the physical devastation, the homes destroyed, the roads flooded, the electrical lines toppled. But what I remember most vividly, the thing I'll never forget for so long as I live, is the look in the eyes of survivors that I met and spoke to as I toured the aftermath of the storm. Without a word, one look in their eyes told me everything I needed to know. Their eyes told me a story of shock, of loss, and fear being pushed aside by determination, hope, and resolve. While we all knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, I don't think anyone imagined it would be quite this long and difficult. But no matter how hard it got, no matter how impossible the odds seemed at the time, we never gave up. Now, some politicians showed up and were all fleeces and photo ops. They ran ads at the boardwalk declaring mission accomplished, donated to the same congressional Republicans that tried to block Sandy aid when I and the late Senator Frank Lautenberg were arguing on the Senate floor for Sandy aid. I've always voted for disaster relief in our country. Flooding in the Mississippi, Hurricane Katrina, wildfires in the West. There's a reason we call this country the United States of America. We're in it together. So I was shocked when for the first time in the state's history we needed disaster assistance that we were being pushed against by some of our Republican colleagues. All the while, homeowners were getting defrauded by insurance companies and having their paperwork lost by the state's rebuilding program. But I didn't leave. When the cameras left, I stuck by New Jersey families. When Tea Party Republicans in Congress blocked disaster relief funding, we fought back. We refused to back down, and we bought the region $60 billion to rebuild. When flood insurance premiums were set to skyrocket just months after Sandy, I wrote and passed a law to stop these hikes, saving New Jersey homeowners nearly $50 million in premiums. And perhaps appropriately, the very first piece of legislation that Senator Booker signed on to when he joined me in the Senate was exactly that law to stop these hikes. It was incredibly important, and he has been fighting with me at my side ever since, 100% of the time on these issues. And we've had a real champion in the House, someone who knows the shore area better than anybody in our state, and someone who is tireless, and Congressman Frank Pallone. I appreciate everything that he has done as well. When Sandy survivors came to me with horror stories of being lowballed by their insurance companies, paying them pennies on the dollar, I led a Senate investigation that uncovered vast systemic fraud and abuse and got homeowners an additional $260 million that they were entitled to. And I appreciate many of them who are here, and Doug, who's speaking today for them. Doug is a Marine who served his nation. The last thing that he needed was to have his nation turn his back on him and his family when they needed it the most. So, Doug, thank you for what you've been doing. When FEMA threatened to close out the increased cost of compliance, or the ICC program, before Sandy survivors could access it, I pushed for an extension and got us an additional 4 years of eligibility. When the Christie administration implemented a system that was backwards and full of needless delays, I got them to reform it to enable homeowners to get assistance and rebuild quicker. And now that we have a productive partner in the governor's office, we're working with Governor Murphy to reallocate federal Sandy dollars to homeowners who still need help getting back in their home. This governor is committed to finishing the job and righting the wrongs of the past. He's moving unspent federal dollars 6 years later, after Sandy, using it to help New Jerseyans get back home. The 1,200 or so New Jerseyans still in the state of rebuilding their lives and their homes have been through hell and back again. Some were defrauded by their building contractor. Some lost tens of thousands of dollars in attorney fees fighting for what they deserved from their insurance company in the first place. And some were paralyzed in fear of dreaded clawback letters. Clawback letters that I would add, it's not that these people used the money in an inappropriate way. They used it to rebuild their homes and their lives. They followed the rules as they were told, and all of a sudden we changed the rules. You don't claw back people in the midst of that. But while their circumstances may be different, the one thing they share is that none of this was their own fault. They didn't choose to get hit by the worst natural disaster in our state's history. They didn't choose to get underpaid by their insurance companies. They just wanted to go back to life like it was on October the 28th, 2012, the day before the nightmare began. So when I look into the eyes of real heroes of Sandy, the Doug Quinns, the Krista Spurbers, the Carol Ferriolis, and so much others, I know that we'll never stop fighting until everyone is back home. Some call me stubborn. I say persistent. Maybe that's the Jersey in me. But I can tell you that I'll continue to spend every single day, write every single bill, cast every single vote, call every single hearing till we get each and every one of our fellow New Jerseyans back at home. And someone who I know has already joined me in that effort and couldn't be a greater champion for what we need to do is my colleague, Senator Cory Booker.
So before I shift to the subject of the press conference, I just want to say to the governor and to those legislative leaders who finally have taken New Jersey into the 21st century. We live in a strange planet. We're the greatest nation on the planet Earth, but yet the Congo and Afghanistan have paid family leave, but the United States of America doesn't. I live in Newark, and I see families in my neighborhood who work full-time jobs, catch extra shifts where they can. And when you see some of the friends I have, I wrote about one woman in my book who struggling paycheck to paycheck, working in an IHOP across the street from University Hospital. Her child is in the emergency room with an asthma attack and literally has to go through the most god-awful calculation, Governor, about whether I stay at work to get a paycheck, I need to stay, keep a roof over my head, or do I cross the street and be there for my frightened child who's having an asthma attack? That is unconscionable that this was the reality in New Jersey until this governor, with legislative leaders, changed it and brought us forward. So, Governor, I am so grateful today. Thousands and thousands of New Jerseyans rejoice today in what you all have done. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And then I want to thank the governor, and all I'm going to do is say some thank yous and get out of the way. I just want to thank the governor for what he did today, what we're announcing today. I cannot believe we have gone through this process where New Jerseyans have been hit by two storms. The actual Sandy storm, and then we're hit with a blizzard of bureaucracy and hucksterism and people just being feasted upon by every single way that they could be taken advantage of. It was so unfair what folks in this state have struggled with. All they wanted was to be made whole. And what Senator Menendez and I were witnessing and had to fight for, I was a mayor when this hit, when the storm hit, a mayor. I didn't get elected until a year after Sandy. And when I got into office, we were working every single day, still trying to help families, day after day as the years clocked on. And here we are 6 years later, and there are still families who are suffering, struggling, being taken advantage of, hurting, and that's got to stop. And today is a glorious day that goes a long way in doing that. And Governor, God bless you. God bless your leadership, and thank you, sir. And then I want to say this, and we should not have a press conference. We should probably have his picture up here. Please remember Frank Lautenberg. Please remember what he did. I wasn't a senator then. Don't give me credit for what Bob Menendez and Frank Lautenberg did. In the worst of environments, with Tea Party people who turned their back on their fellow Americans, Frank Lautenberg and this guy stood in the well of the Senate and fought and fought and fought. Two street fighters from Hudson County and Passaic County in the bowels of the United States Senate and the Capitol, fighting to make sure that this region got $60 billion plus. I mean, that Frank Lautenberg, God bless, his legacy lives on today, and I want to give him credit for what he did. I want to thank Brother Pallone, because we have a bicameral system, and what he did over there in a heroic way was also extraordinary, and he deserves a lot of credit. Would you please give him one more round of applause? Just two more thank yous, I'm out of the way, but I have learned in life that hope is the active conviction that despair will not have the last word. Hope is the active conviction that despair will not have the last word. And the champions of hope really are the local leaders and the residents themselves who never, ever gave up. Who never gave up. And Doug, you are so emblematic to me of this, because you are a righteous badass. You are really emblematic of like, you are so Jersey. If we cut you right now, you would bleed Jersey. And I just think you are emblematic of a lot of the other leaders I met that have that same grit, that same determination. They may face a defeat, but they are never defeated. They may get knocked down, but they're never knocked out. That's the folks who deserve the thanks, as well as the local leaders, the local mayors, the local activists who did things. And then the final person I just want to thank, because I have witnessed this now for 5 years of my life. On October 31st, just days from now, will be my 5th anniversary as a United States Senator. I was sworn in on the auspicious day of Halloween. And I have had partners so many points in my life, from starting in like my quarterback in high school football and me. I mean, great partners. I can go all the way through the jobs I've had. There has been no greater partner in my life who's not just been a partner, but been a mentor, not just been a mentor, but has been an inspiration. And that is my senior senator, Bob Menendez. I'm telling you right now, I wish every New Jersey resident knew what I knew, could see what I see, day in, day out. I have seen this man work and sweat and fight. I have seen him cry. I have seen him love this state in a way that would inspire every New Jerseyan. One of my favorite moments in the Senate. I have legions of these stories, and we don't have time. I'll get out of the way after this one. I am literally in the Senate, in the cloakroom, when another Democrat, because they were having a disaster in their state, realized how hard it is to achieve what he achieved, to get money out of a Republican-controlled environment. And so his thought was, well, I'm going to take some of the already allocated Sandy funds from this region, and was literally working out a deal with Senate leadership to take some of the Sandy money. And I hear about this, and I'm getting worked up. And there was a moment when we all sort of crossed paths. Bob Menendez, this guy, crosses, or woman, I'm not going to tell you who it was, crossed paths in the cloakroom. And I'm there, and I watch Bob Menendez go straight New Jersey on this guy. and literally, I'm a little bit bigger than Bob, and I sat there, all I had to do was go, yeah. As Bob ripped into him, there was no way one penny would be taken away from the state of New Jersey. You see, this is who Bob Menendez is. He lives and dies for this state. His heart breaks for this state. He gets up to struggle for this state. And this is my worry right now, is we're not done. Pallone works on these issues all the time. Climate change is happening. These storms are more frequent. He and I just pulled off a victory of changing some of the qualifications for Army Corps so we can do more resiliency. But you see, I am the junior senator for New Jersey. I've only got 5 years in. This guy is the leader of committees. He's ranking in positions of jurisdiction. He is positioned so much better than me to get for Jersey, to fight for Jersey. When I look to the future of this state, we need Bob Menendez for resiliency money. We need Bob Menendez to bring home the kind of money that this guy knows how to use, from health care funds to resiliency funds to green acres. I can go through the things we do every day. The infrastructure dollars that nobody will read about, the press is not interested in, the Tiger grants, the SAFER grants. I've only got 5 years in. I'm a baby in Senate terms. I'm worried about the future because storms are going to come. They don't define us. What defines us is the champions we have, from community leaders to titans in the Senate. How we fight back against the storms, whether they're man-made or God-sent. And I'm telling you right now, if a storm is coming and I'm going to be manning the barricades, there's one guy I want with me, and that's Bob Menendez.
That's impossible to follow. Senator, I'm just going to live every second of my life till I can earn the title from you someday of righteous badass. I will have no other goal in my life. Ladies and gentlemen, the Dean, Congressman Frank Pallone.
I don't know, all these righteous, badass, titan, dean, whatever. I don't have a lot to add, but I just want to say this. What Senator Booker said about Senator Menendez and his work is certainly true. One of the biggest problems I think that we faced in the aftermath of Sandy, and that we still face, is that we have a government in Washington, I think, I'm going to talk about Washington, that is too bureaucratic, is too not focused on exactly what it means to help people, back at home. And I don't know whether it's the Union Beach officials or it's Doug and the different residents that came forward and started the different organizations that gave us the ideas about what to be done. I think one of the things that's so outstanding about Senator Menendez is that he realized from the very beginning that we had to get to the bottom of this, and it wasn't just something that we would have a press conference about or we would talk about today. We had to be in it for the long term. We had to actually talk to people like Doug and the others that are here gathered who were affected and see what we could do to help them now and what we could do in the future, because as Senator Booker said, this is in the long term, and it's still happening now. You know, I was saying to some of you when I came in that firehouse that I was having coffee this morning with some friends, and they said, "Where are you going today?" And I said, "I'm going to Union Beach because it's the 6th anniversary of Sandy, and there's still a lot of work to be done." And they were like, "What do you mean? The people aren't back in their homes? The businesses aren't back?" I said, "No, not at all. I mean, sure, a lot are back, but there are a lot that are not." And what we've seen with Bob Menendez is, you know, and now today with this announcement by the governor, which I think is also very important and comes from what Bob has looked at and seen from all of you, is that these programs at the federal level don't work unless somebody's watching and some practical input is being brought from the citizenry. And so when you announced today, Governor, about the clawback, that's a perfect example. I'm telling you right now, I was in the office in Leonardo, in the FEMA office in Leonardo a day or two after the storm, and I remember the people coming in. Some of you heard me tell this story. And everybody was told, apply for everything. Apply for the SBA. Apply for the FEMA money. Get whatever money you can. And unfortunately, because it's, you know, not a lot of people that are working temporarily, they were told that you were eligible. The people applied. They got the money. They met all the guidelines. And how dare the FEMA or the federal government come back and say, well, you've got to get us a reimbursement. You did everything you were supposed to do. You didn't defraud anybody like some of these engineers. You did everything you were supposed to do, but we want the money back. Well, I think the governor recognizes that that's just not fair. That's not what you do. And so what you're suggesting, what you're doing today with both the, you know, the loan forgiveness and the eliminating the clawback is really important, and it's going to have an immediate impact on a lot of people here. And we had a meeting earlier today in Belford, and Bob, Senator Menendez, laid out his reforms for the flood insurance program. Everyone in the Bay Shore knows that the flood insurance program doesn't work, and he laid out the things that came from all these all the residents today, Doug and others, about what reforms we need to make. And that's still ongoing. That hasn't happened. We actually have a deadline for the flood insurance program coming up in a month. So we still need to work on all these things. But you do have people here, particularly Senator Menendez, but all of us as well, who are trying to take the input that you've given us and make this into something that actually works at the government level. And if we can do that, you know, then it's something that we can be proud of. We're not there. We're not there by any means. But it is really important that we do that and that we look at this in the long term and see what we can do to make people's lives better. And not only for the people that have been affected by Sandy, but in the future as well. So I just want to thank all of you for, you know, for all that you've done to provide this very important input. Thanks.
I don't know what we were thinking. We chose this location across the street for the Christie for President rally, so I apologize. Next time we'll be smarter about that. Oh dear. Couple of questions from the press, Matt.
Governor, maybe from your remarks, any way that you think that your predecessor sort of dropped the ball at some point in the recovery? And Senator Menendez, given events post-Sandy that you've been at with Governor Christie, I noticed that you sort of took a shot at him with photo ops and police. When did your understanding of how he handled the storm sort of take a shift? Because these are new remarks in here.
I wasn't there, so I don't know how you want to.
Yeah, sure. So, look, you know, we worked with the governor to bring records amount of money back. And it started off all right, but then it became clear to me as I was listening to many of the people who are sitting around you that the programs weren't working to respond to the needs that they had. They were bureaucratic. They were constantly told different things, different standards. They were waiting forever to get resources. That's just simply wrong. And so, you know, it's easy when the first part, you were all focused on the damage and the consequences and whatnot. But after that faded, there were still people who had real lives still shattered, people who had real consequences, and the state wasn't responding. Now, when I bring federal monies, I need a state partner that actually helps us deliver on the federal monies. And the reality is, on the REM program, on a whole host of issues that the state was administrating, they got rid of the person who was running it after millions of dollars. So, when we raised the questions from a federal level, when we drove the federal agencies that had oversight over the monies, that's when the state changed. So that's what I mean. It's easy to, be, at the beginning, and then disasters and consequences don't just end after a certain period of time. They continue. And many of us were still there, as we are today, still dealing with that reality. The fact that this money is still standing there, and that I'm glad that the governor is reallocating it, is incredibly important. But you would think that this would have been done before. This governor's been in office, 10 months. This should have been done before. So that's what I meant. Mayor, I'm glad to see you here. I mean, it's an extraordinary commitment to come out of your brace and come here to be with all of us today, but you've been a tremendous leader in this community, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Great to see you. I will tell you, one thing that we thought long and hard about is whether or not to attach any fanfare with today, because we now have to execute. So I don't want to ever be accused of the guy who took the victory lap. There are processes that we have to go through this. We need HUD. By the way, there's a process with HUD that we are embarking upon on the $50 million piece. The clawback process. I'm happy we've frozen it from day one, but we want a year from now. I want to make sure people look back and say, you know what, they actually did what they said they were going to do. Sir.
Yes, Governor. The $50 million for these two programs is coming from as yet unspent Sandy federal funds. Beyond that, how much more federal Sandy funds are unspent?
So the $50 million is for the forgivable loan, 15-year forgivable loan. That does not relate to the clawback. So that's just, and we have to go through a process with HUD, which we are beginning. We have to do a public hearing here and then submit the waiver request. We have every expectation that we'll achieve what our objective is. As it relates to other unspent federal money, I actually don't know. Any of you have that?
Well, I don't think that's what you referenced, but let me just say briefly, because I see that Mayor Paul Smith came in. A lot of the money that's still outstanding is for the larger flood control and projects, like the one we're doing here in Union Beach. In other words, we've been focusing on individuals and helping individuals, but the bottom line is a lot of that package was for Army Corps flood control projects, and a perfect example is Union Beach. And, these are ongoing, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars. And I want to say that, again, just like what we talked about with individuals, Mayor Smith and Union Beach Council, they've been working very hard to get the flood control project here in Union Beach, and there's one in Port Monmouth, and there's still possibility in Highlands. So just like the individual stuff, these larger public works projects, there's still money out there that has to be spent, and there's still a lot of work that we're working with the federal government and with the governor's office to get those moving as well. And to his credit, I don't think we would have the project in Union Beach if it wasn't for Paul Smith. So I want to thank you, Paul, for all you've done.
Dan Kelly, who is a very important guy in our front office who handles, unfortunately, he and I have spent a lot of time together because among other things, he has weather as part of emergency response, as part of his remit. There's Dan tells me, about $1.2 billion that needs to be spent by 2022. So there was a 10-year window, but all of the monies are attached to specific programs. So there's no pile. I'd like to think there was a pile of cash sitting out there, and there isn't. Right.
Governor, off topic, I would ask you, please, could you address what happened in Pittsburgh and security for houses of worship in New Jersey going forward? And then I'd also like to ask Senator Booker, because he was the target of one of those mail bombs, to address his experience with that.
Yeah, so this is an awful, unspeakable tragedy which took place on the Sabbath on Saturday. 11 lives lost, many injured, including 4 extraordinary and brave members of law enforcement. If you look at the ages, it's jaw-dropping. 54, I believe, up to 97. Can you imagine a 97-year-old woman waking up, going to worship, and thinking in some remote possibility that she was going to get killed, shot? It's just extraordinary. It's the biggest attack on any Jewish community in the history of our country. And for me, it's even more striking as I've just come from Germany, whose history I know well, and Israel after that. So it's an awful, awful, sad chapter, a slaughter, no other way to put it. Evil was wrought on these people. We immediately, and it's not like we've gone from ground zero, so this has been, soft targets as a general matter are a high focus on our Department of Homeland Security. And I was with our director several times yesterday and twice in synagogues. We have constant, deep engagement with the 21 county emergency response and anti-terror teams. Lots of discussions on how to harden targets, whether that's through physical protection or human protection, additional security, or through other measures. And these conversations are with mayors, heads of federations, leaders in houses of worship, not just in the Jewish community. Private schools, which are religious, are also on that list. So a deep engagement, already deep, now even deeper. And it is iterative. There's an 11 a.m., I think, taking place right now. Began at 11 a.m., an all-hands conference call on this topic led by the Director of Homeland Security, Jared Maples, with all interested parties laying out that plan. I'm going to be with the press again, by the way. We're going to make some announcements on further gun safety measures this afternoon. And if I get a readout of that call today, if you're there, I'll come back to you. Corey, do you want to jump in?
Just two things real quick. In regards to whether it's pipe bombs or the horrific manifestation of evil we saw in Pittsburgh, I first recognize that pipe bomb never even made it to New Jersey. Why? Because we have first responders all over this country who are incredibly heroic. And unfortunately, we saw that when the call is there, we saw first responders in Pittsburgh storm into an active shooting situation and sacrifice themselves for the safety of us. And so the first thing we should all recognize is when we see someone in uniform, know that that's not just something that they put on. It's a commitment they make, that in a time of trouble they stand up for us and they put their lives on the line. And that's something that I recognized when I heard that a bomb intended for my Camden office got stopped in Florida because of these folks that we often take for granted. And the second thing I just want to say is, the opposite of justice is not injustice. It is apathy. It is indifference. It's inaction. Horrific thing that happened. We are grieving right now. But why haven't we been talking as a country about a 50% rise over the last year or so of anti-Semitic actions? 50% rise in attacks. I was just on a college campus yesterday up in New Hampshire where swastikas were being painted. Swastikas in America? How many people did we lose in World War II fighting against that Nazi evil? And we're seeing a rise of those things being spray painted. We've seen a rise in hate crimes in this state. Attacks on Sikh Americans. Attacks on Muslim Americans. We in our country right now are seeing a rise in hate where people are feeling a license to hate people. And why? Because of their race, their religion. And so I know this is the time where people want to try to point fingers of blame, but this is a time where all of us should be accepting responsibility. That there are things going on in our country right now that do not reflect the greatness, the decency, the kindness, the grace of who we are. And we all share a responsibility, not just to react to punctuated, horrific events, whether it's black people killed in a church in South Carolina, gay people killed in a nightclub in Florida, Jewish people killed worshiping in Pittsburgh. When hate is on the rise in the United States of America, the nation that has stood against hatred, stood against violence, stood against bigotry, we all have a responsibility to confront and address this. It's not enough to say, I'm not a racist. We must be anti-racist. It's not enough to say, I'm not anti-Semitic. We must be anti-Semitism and work every day to make this nation one of more justice and more love.
will you change what you are doing because of this threat?
So I've recognized the real threat, not physical threats to me. The real threat in this country right now is that we are seeing a rise in, we have people hate each other just because of what political party you are. That's outrageous. I see vile things written about people just because of what party they're in. So every speech I give, and Bob and I both understand this, I try to talk about the need for our country to have a revival of civic grace. And the need for us to begin to try to create, in a more determined fashion now, a beloved community in our country. That is what is needed. I am frightened. Fear is not an unproductive emotion. It's what you do in the face of fear that defines you. But I have fear right now about the rising levels of hate being measured across the board in this country, and what that could often end up creating, the horrific outcomes that that's going to continue to create unless every single American takes responsibility and rejects that.
Senator Charlie, and that'll be the last one for you again.
For both senators, you mentioned there's a license now to hate. Do you think the president's rhetoric and his behavior has given people the license to hate, or is he somewhat
I'm just going to say, I find what the President of the United States has said from his campaigning till now, much of what he's saying is repugnant. It is a violation of values. It's not a Republican thing. I hear Republican colleagues reject what comes out of his mouth. But please do not make it just about him. That is almost like saying, I'm not responsible. This is not about finding blame. This is about accepting, all of us accepting responsibility. If you don't like what someone is saying, the way to counter that is not with more hate. King said it, hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. And so I'm tired of the loop where the president says something outrageous, the press runs to me for a response. I don't want to get dragged into that loop. Who I am is not defined by who he is. I don't want to be about what I'm against. I want to be about what I'm for. What I'm for is the values of my country written into the Declaration of Independence, that we've got to pledge to each other, as it says at the end of that, our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Every American should reread the end of the Declaration of Independence and commit themselves to pledging to other Americans, regardless of race, religion, or party, that we are going to pledge to each other our lives, like this gentleman does every day, our fortunes, but most importantly of those three, our sacred honor. If we all live with that, we're going to be okay. And the instances of hate will diminish. They'll be snuffed out by our love.
Amen, and thank you for coming.
Thank you all. Deep appreciation.
Okay, and that concludes today's Fox 29 News Now. Thank you for watching, and catch us again tomorrow around 10 a.m.